I don't look at this as the end of something in the series. I think this is the beginning of a new year. A fabulous way to start it with our speakers tonight. So I'm going to have to read some of this because it's happened to me relatively recently. Tod Williams, along with his partner Billie Tsien, co-founded their eponymous New York City architecture firm in 1986. Their studio focuses on work for institutions, including schools, museums, nonprofit organizations, committed to benefiting and inspiring their surrounding communities. Better? Okay. Notable projects include the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, Asia Society Hong Kong Center, and in 2015 were selected as the architects for the Obama Presidential Center in Chicago, which its current iteration was recently published, and I hope you all saw that. I think it's getting vastly better. Over the past 3 decades, their dedication to this work has received numerous national and international citations, including the National Medal of Arts from President Obama, the Firm of the Year Award from the AIA in 2013. They're deeply committed to making a better world through architecture. This commitment extends to teaching. Tod and Billie have taught at Harvard, Yale, University of Michigan, Parsons School, SCI-Arc, UVA, University of Texas, and last but not least, University of Pennsylvania. They've written a series of books. The first, Work, Life, was an early monograph, I believe the first, that is a very important subject if you happen to be married to your partner in business. And so they worked that out in the book, and it was a very, very touching book about their relationship and all of the great projects they had produced to that time. The second book is Architecture of the Barnes Foundation, A Gallery in a Garden, Garden in a Gallery. It was recently published. And then last but not least, a small book called Wunderkammer, or Wonder Room, to translate that book. And they're all available. I've owned these books for many years and have enjoyed them and absorbed them myself. So I couldn't be more thrilled to be here tonight to present one of my long-standing heroes. Speaking for myself as a young architect in the 90s, working in the art museum world in Philadelphia, this firm was one of a handful of architects we all looked to lead us out of the doldrums of postmodernism. My first experience with their work was the Museum of American Folk Art in the early 2000s. What a revelation. I could not believe it. I meant to spend an hour there, and I ended up spending the whole day filling up a whole notebook, a sketchbook. This was before iPhotos, any other kind of recording device that architects were familiar with at the time. And it was something, it was a revelation looking at that. I could sense the architect understood Louis Kahn without any ostensible copying. There was a great freedom of materiality and experimentation. It was alive. It was transformational. New York City was transformed. I was transformed. It was an electrifying time. The project was a game changer for me and many others. I'm not alone in that. Through their work, the topic of materiality has been significantly advanced, the physical manifestation of the work itself being an overriding concern. Thanks, Michelle, I'm sorry. As a consequence, there's a deep sense of craft and celebration of making in all of their work. They make good marks. Through their work, the study of phenomenology has found renewed meaning in architecture and across other disciplines at large. The study of experiential qualities, the sensuous capacity of materials, the importance of things, tactility. These are all things that humans are naturally wired to enjoy and to respond to. I'll end with 4 descriptors: restrained, ethical, emphasis on interiority, and intimate. And with that, please join me in welcoming Tod Williams.
Thank you, Willis. Am I to use this baby too? It's not just, okay, yikes, okay. This is too much for me to handle. First, I want to say thanks, it's great to be here. I did intend to spend this time through Sunday, and the plane even was 2.5 hours late, so it's even less time than I wished I'd had, so I'm truly unhappy. I set the slides a few days ago when I realized this was going to happen. I have to be back in the studio. A group of people are coming in tomorrow that are important, and so I had to take a deep breath. I had hoped to take a deep breath here, in fact, and I did as I stepped off the plane. It's absolutely wonderful to actually be able to walk off a plane and step onto the tarmac, as we call it, and take a breath of the Aspen air. So for many reasons, the deep breath is an important aspect of this talk, and I should say this is a time where we all need to take a deep breath. And so this Leonardo's drawing of the interior is meaningful to me and to us. As Willis mentioned, my wife and partner, Billie Tsien, is more than my other half. The studio of nearly 40 people who've been with us, and on average about 10 years, are extremely important to all the work we do. But we believe in the body, and we believe in the lungs. So as architects, we're concerned with solidity, but the real power of a building lies in the experience, which is ephemeral. So I'm trying to balance the two things, this issue of the groundedness, the physical, the mass, the material in the hand. And we think about this actually all the time. It's sort of an aspect of the yin-yang of Billie and my life together. We either complement or don't complement one another, but we're very different in our emotions, but we both believe in this sort of sense of the groundedness. And the ephemeral, that is the issue of light, restraint, memory, and the spirit. So we're constantly thinking of those in our work, and the work today is a little bit of that. I grew up in Detroit. Actually, I was born in Detroit, but grew up in Birmingham, north of that. Went east to school. One of my college roommates, Bruce McMillan, is here. Went to Princeton, and I would go back in 1961, would go back and forth, and finally, well, immediately after school, I basically moved to New York City. Because New York, in a way, although I grew up in actually quite an idyllic environment, actually also up in northern Michigan, and loved it and still love it dearly, I wanted the energy of New York. And New York in 1967, which is when I moved in, was my breath of fresh air. It was hardly fresh, if anyone was there at that time. I'll show a few images of it. Actually, my first visits were in the 61. This was the way it was. I can't believe now that I've continued to live there all these years. Try this one out. I mean, I guess it's coming back in a different way, but, or this one. I mean, the trash strike of 68, and subway cars. In fact, I think I fell in love first with New York in a subway car when I saw all the different people and realized that life was much more than people that just looked just like me. Carnegie Hall. I moved in Carnegie Hall in 1972. And then for the next, I would say since 1972, this has been our neighborhood. I lived there from 73 to 2008 when we all were kicked out. Our studio's on Central Park South, and we live now, after 2008, on 67th Street. Carnegie Hall, I fell in love with Carnegie Hall as being emblematic of New York because it was a tower of the arts at that time. It had the concert hall, still does. It has 2 other halls, but you could actually live there. There were 160 studios in Carnegie Hall. I first moved into a low studio, the size of a dozen chairs here, and then someone moved out and I got the top floor. And the top floor I shared with a partner and a model maker, and they slowly moved out and I moved in. But there were studios there, dance studios and painting studios, and it was one wonderful combination of all kinds of people. This is Bill Cunningham. If anyone knows Bill Cunningham or knew of him, he took those amazing pictures for the New York Times fashion shots where everyone was in red, and particularly loved the outrageous, and he lived just a floor below us. Just before we were thrown out of Carnegie Hall, along with Bill, I did a drawing of the place where we lived, and we lived then for 36 years. We would go up the elevator stopped at the floor below. We'd go up the fire stair, metal fire stair, leave our shoes outside, put my bike behind the door. And then this was our living room. Our son's bedroom was here, not the largest. Kitchen here, dining room, bathroom, and kind of study. We'll call that our son's living room. We took these pictures literally just days before we moved out. It had been the design studio and then became our sort of thing studio. These were the windows to our son's room right there, but they were on axis. You could look out a window to the park. So it wasn't completely abused. Well, sort of. The drawers where we kept our pencils when the studio was there, the things that we loved to collect, our own kind of Wunderkammer. And our back door, that railing wasn't there for the first 30 years. And the interior, we would climb up this rung ladder to our bed up top, which was cantilevered over the edge. Sometimes I'd have to climb in through that window when I forgot my keys. And you didn't dare get too rambunctious up there. Our son visiting just before he left, he's nearly my size. So I'm going to now talk about 4 projects. Because actually I did, in fact, as a young person, though I was born in Detroit, I grew up and spent my early years on this amazing campus at Cranbrook. And then later, this was a campus designed by Eero Saarinen, sort of Finnish style, Carl Millis' sculpture, where art, architecture, and landscape were brought together in the intellectual life. It was kind of an ideal place and still is, except that it's removed from the city. But around 2000, we were asked to do a swimming pool. You can see this is the athletic complex through here for the school. This is the art academy that Eero Saarinen designed. The boys' school at that time, buildings by Rafael Maneo here and Stephen Hole up there. And we were asked to do a swimming pool. But this idea of actually a breath has been with me for a long time and remains in the work. So I believed we'd done a swimming pool, which if any of you are swimmers, you know, are always air conditioned in order to dehumidify. They become a kind of nasty internal environment. And I'd done actually 2 of them and was upset with all of the systems. And I said, well, in this case, because it's an idyllic community, we want to make a competitive pool that is naturally ventilated. So this is the model, which connected to the Saarinen buildings of the 20s by a bridge, and which had its own internal system without elevator that made those buildings of the 20s and this accessible. The next slide shows how we ventilated it. If you have natural ventilation on 4 sides and you ventilate through the top, you can get all the breezes you want. You all know that here in Aspen, I'm sure. So although it's aided by fans, there's no air conditioning. It needed a deep roof, and it was a deep pool. It happens to turn Cranbrook into the state champion swimming team. It's a tri-pool competitive space. Our model, thinking about that space where the structure above was steel and you had these large tubes, actually a simple cone. We didn't use computers at that time, and that was then thrust through this so I could walk around on this roof and change the lights, or someone could inspect the steel. And it's been a great success. This was it just after it was made, completing Saarinen's long lawn. Our idea was that the building was a backdrop, and the building is essentially embedded in the woods. We went to Hibbing, Minnesota, and worked with a person that did mine shaft controls, and they did a design build, and so these are all hydraulically operated. These louvers, in this case, are only 15 feet tall. On the other side, they're 25 feet tall. The roof also opens by that same system. So it actually does breathe. And you can swim there in the winter and have the snow come in through the roof, though they rarely do it. I had thought that the swimmers would love it for competitive swimming, which they do, except they don't use it that way anymore because they want even illumination. But here's the roof opening, which it does magically from time to time, and then this incredible breath of air comes through. So this is a space which I'm pleased to say is both a space for that is a grounded space that's grounded in the reality of competitive swimming, and it's also grounded in the spirit. And today, actually, this is about 5 years. What I'm pleased about is that the building is essentially being embedded in the landscape. The landscape is, in fact, the facade, and so when you open those doors, you smell the pine forest. The next project I'm going to share is the Barnes Foundation, which you may know. This is the Parkway in Philadelphia, downtown Philadelphia. I'll give a short talk about what the Barnes Foundation is. It's Albert Barnes was an industrialist, an engineer who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks, but made a lot of money at the University of Pennsylvania, Willis's alma mater, and invented with a partner something called Argyrol. Once he became very, very wealthy, he decided he would collect art, as many people do. His wife was interested in horticulture, so they bought a building and tore it down and made an arboretum. And she worked on the gardens and was interested in the gardens, and he collected art. He died in an automobile crash in 1951, but he had collected over 2,000 works of art, 47 Picassos, I think 55 Renoirs. And he began to hang this thing in ensembles, in a little kind of a Wunderkammer. He believed that everything could be art. In fact, he was one of the earliest collectors of African art, not as anthropological elements, but actually as art. In this case, you can see he's doing a bilateral hang of his paintings, which I think is crazy. But his idea was that, a Renoir would be balanced across a Renoir, and every one of the 22 rooms would be perfectly hung with a combination of hardware, so your eye would travel across the surface of the room, and you would ask questions about the art itself. In fact, that's sort of happening here. I noticed in both the Struth show, he's putting the work up, and damned if you want to try to figure out what is what. You have to use your imagination and think about where you are in that room and in those works in order to, in a way, locate yourself and struggle. So, this was never supposed to move. In his will, he didn't want it to move. He was a cantankerous guy and hated anyone that was intellectual. The outside was designed by Paul Cray, who was one of the architects that was Luke Kahn's teacher and also designed the Parkway. We came to the interview with this drawing that is, Billie and I always try to get together with something that we believe in, and when we go to an interview, in this case it was that the Barnes Foundation was a gallery in a garden, and when we brought it into Philadelphia in a smaller site, we wanted to remain a gallery in the garden, but also have the garden be in the gallery. Because although in Marion there were windows all around that building, none of them looked out into the garden that his wife had. The challenging light circumstances prevented that. So here in the Parkway, where all of the buildings were built in basically the 20s, we see the public library through here, the Rodin Museum, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Science Museum, suddenly I've lost the name, and the Parkway that created design. Our building was put in the place, for $1, the city gave the site to the Barnes. There was a house of detention, a very sad place with terrible grounds, and the project was allowed to come here. So this is our building, and it too has this desire to bring a sort of a sense of life to the interior. Thinking about the Parkway, when it wanted the building to be made of limestone, so it felt like it was a partner with the other buildings. We wanted to have a sort of a quiet and serene exterior like the neoclassical buildings. We wanted to relate very slightly to the reference to the gardens in Paris. This was also in a way thought of. So the building is made of limestone here with a light box on top. We wanted you to work hard to get into the museum, so you leave your car away and you walk around this wall. That's the public library, so there's some discussion through there. Past this Ellsworth Kelly that came after our design. Walk under an alley of red Japanese pine, and then go across the water and actually walk into the building. So you don't go from your car into the building. It's important for us to think that you walk through a park into the building. And that's really, again, what we're trying to do. We did at Cranbrook. Inside, you actually we created walls, so you shut the city out. You walk in and then turn right. It's sort of a mysterious light-filled entry, and then enter a much more domestic space, and eventually come to this very large space in the inside. These are my drawings exploring what this light box would be. We wanted it to be a sort of a grounded place that belonged to all people, and this is the way I work, or we work. My early sketch of that light court. We wanted you to remain outside even if you're inside, and the light court as it is today, so that we bring its solar panels continuously on top, giving about 10% of the energy to the building, and then bringing light in and bouncing it into the interior, and then amplifying it with a little artificial light. This space, there's a lot to say about this space, but the collection, the 22 rooms are behind this wall. The rooms that support that are behind this wall, and the offices are all up here, borrowing the natural light. And I'd say this is a space of the spirit. There are many things can happen here. You could have a 400-person sit-down dinner or a performance. It's always changing a little bit. The walls are made of a Jerusalem limestone, and Billy and I did drawings of the gates so that we felt we were always connected to the original barns. In this case, we're looking into the galleries where, because of glass technology, we're able to look out into the landscape. So it actually, in fact, this is the barns. We had to exactly replicate the gallery. So this is the gallery with the great Matisse La Dance that was installed there. The two works that were there, and here these were windows that you actually couldn't look out. These were constantly closed. And today we look out through wooden windows to the landscape. So these are the galleries today. We were studying the idea of light, and we actually, interestingly, I was thinking about the Dulwich Picture Galleries and went to the National Gallery in London, Willis, which you worked on, to think about light, and I came back and I said, we've got to have light from above. And they said, no way. I said, you've got to do it, and they did it. So we made a full-scale mock-up and tested out how the light could come into the gallery, so every gallery was indirectly bathed by light. Paul Morantz, who worked with you, worked with us. We made a full-scale mock-up, and then we tested out to try to understand the existing galleries relative to how we could make contemporary work feel a little bit like it's both belong to the past and to the present. Oops, here we are. One of the galleries, that's the gallery that's then complete. The work all set. We added some small spaces where we designed this table, and you could rest and read a book in between the galleries. We had an outdoor terrace where that same light box continued out, cantilevered out, so you could be out of doors under cover. And then we brought the light down into the lower level, 20 feet below. So we created a garden and a library down here, and this has become quite a popular place. So it looks pretty mute on the outside, but it's actually, this is the conservation lab. And it's a kind of horizontal building in we're interested in horizontal buildings. Actually, as anyone knows, the Presidential Center, you said it's getting better. Thank you. It was kind of dog-eat to start with, but we're working on that. You asked also about this project in India. About 10 years ago, two men knocked on the door and said, would you like to do a campus in India? Actually, it was 13 years ago. And I said, no, I've never been to India. I'm not a campus architect. I don't know anything about this. He said, well, the person who owns the company is interested in you working. And I said, well, that's wild, but we're working in Hong Kong. I'll show you the Hong Kong project. Maybe when I'm there, I could come over and take a look and meet him. At any rate, we did, and then we've been working on that project now for 13, 14, 15 years. It's really near the airport in Mumbai. It was an interesting project because Ratan Tata, who's the head of the Tata Consultancy Group, is the most, they run the marathon in New York, if you ever see that thing. Actually, this is a house he spent time in as a young man, but they had put industrial buildings in the site, but there was a very green site in what is not a very green city. And he asked us to make this campus, and so these are the buildings that we've done so far. There are 2 more that are going to come in here when we get permission. So I haven't been there for about 3 years, but as usual, we show freehand drawings to the client. That's what we do. Then we make models. So this is a model of the complex when it's done. But these are images from the phasing. So we have the red phase and the yellow phase are done, and now we're waiting for the purple phase. There are about 2,500 people there, and we decided to use only methods and materials that were in India. So actually he gave us the ability to go around and visit cities in India. And we began to see what they could do there. So what I like about this is that it actually feels very much like it belongs here. The site sloped 30 feet from one end to the next, and we decided to plow our buildings horizontally into the site. It's about 30 feet above sea level. One time when we were working on it, they had 36 inches of rain in a day, so rain can be pretty heavy. At any rate, this is our idea of always walking, using outside, even in the heat of Mumbai, to go from building to building. This is one of the things that happens when you plow a building into the ground. You actually then have retaining walls to keep the existing trees where they were. So the trees remain where they were. We walk along behind a jolly here, so you're covered from the sun, and all of the fire stairs are stone outside so that they're full of breezes. And then this is the hand-carved jollies that we found could be done in Rajasthan. This is broken tile work that gives a kind of reflectivity that's actually done by, it's called brickbat construction. Then you break these plates, or now it's flat tiles, to create another harder exterior. These are the men working by hand. You get the stone out of Rajasthan, which is called dolper. It's a quite soft limestone, but as it oxidizes and meets the air, it gets harder and harder. So in the first weeks that it's out off the ground, the men start carving it, and they can carve it from both sides so that the actual image on one side is different from the other. I thought, gee whiz, I actually asked them, could I build a whole house out of this? In 2004, they said, yeah, for about 100,000. So I said, okay, we got to use this stuff. At any rate, this is us in the walkways up there. That's obviously, it's a Muslim idea of the woman being veiled, and then breezes coming through the jolly. Today, of course, that landscape was just done, but it's absolutely verdant. So the sections through the building, some of the retaining walls, which is interesting, you're actually walking through channels in the land. And what's good is that because we've shielded all the windows from direct sunlight, there are no shades required here, even in Mumbai where it's super hot. Again, this is now all verdant. This is hand-laid stone. Everything is hand-built there. Our idea, once again, from Cranbrook, in a way, saying, why don't we use natural convection? And it is these are the air-conditioned spaces. So everything that didn't require air conditioning, we did outside. The kitchens, the yoga room, the pool, the walkways. So here we have a tall element. The water goes down it. A little bit of cool comes in, and then convection pulls it up through these tubes, and these are the air-conditioned offices next to it. And people are using these spaces. We use where we made, these are actually tapestries. We made 115 ikat tapestries working with women in the north to kind of create a sense of color inside the space. You can see people, this is one of the fire stairs, but because they're all 5 feet wide and they're made of stone, they're really pleasant to be in. And I think people are quite happy here. We designed these lights out of copper tubes and just have a simple light in the top, another light in the bottom, and cut holes in them. If anyone ever went to Chandigarh, you saw that Le Corbusier did that. And then using wood from godowns or the old buildings that were removed to be kind of warm the ceilings. So a lot of life occurs out here on these terraces. They're not just hallways. This was a stupid thing to do, and I regret it, because water's precious. I said you need to have a swimming pool. It's kind of an amazing pool. I should say it's 15 feet above the ground, so you're floating in the landscape. But this is a big slot, so when the monsoon comes, the water just thunders through that slot. I now wouldn't do that because it seems wasteful. But at least the pool is also shaded from the sun, and actually anyone who knows pools, you shouldn't be out in the sun in a pool, you should be in the dappled light. Next project is in Hong Kong. This one won in a competition in 2001. Actually, exactly, we were there with Sejima and our friend Elias Torres, the three competitors, when we heard we'd just been told we were winning, we'd won the competition. We were treating everyone to dinner at 9 o'clock and the World Trade Center came down. So we were there for a week. But this is the site, it's in the center of Hong Kong. It's for the Asia Society, and once again, we're trying to say what kind of a building do we do in this vertical city. And it was an interesting site because when we saw it, and these are our photographs, there were buildings, British barracks from the 1800s that were there, and this one is from the 1930s, this one is from 1900, this is from 1854, and it was a jungle, but it was an unused jungle. And so this was our concept, which was the British had made a platform in the middle of the jungle to set their munitions in. So all these buildings are on a horizontal platform, and this is the slope with towers all around it. And our idea was to put a building down here and use the roof of the building to connect the entire site. So we call this a horizontal building in a vertical city. And our competition model was, this is the GG block you saw, another block, and another block with these berms to stop explosions from destroying the buildings should the munitions explode in the 1800s. And so we basically made a kind of Chinese garden where you move through the site horizontally in this vertical landscape. This is the slope. Actually, that's the old GG block, which we are reusing. It is now conditioned, and the one thing we made, which was a glass block, but the moment you step out of your car and you walk behind a wall, you're in the thundering sound of water because it rains there a lot, and the nullahs, or channels of water, are always full of the sound of rushing water. And so this becomes a very protected landscape that is actually exposed. So this is the roof of the building among all the towers. And because it rains very heavily there, I can walk in the sun here, or I could walk in the shade there. So the lower one is a gentle slope that moves up to meet the other one at the other end. So the whole idea is to walk through the complex and make the experience a journey. And this has been successful. This was a design sketches on how that would work because I needed to bring utilities. We brought the utilities here where you could actually reach them as you from the upper bridge to the lower site. And of course, this needed to be to disrupt the landscape as little as possible. So there are these large piers. Using a kind of sense of the Chinese landscape, which anyone knows Chinese gardens, which we have studied and been to, this idea of the sort of meander and finding life inside the Chinese garden as you proceed. So there are many different lives in a Chinese garden. It's not as reduced as a Japanese garden. At any rate, this is the 1840s building, which is restored. The tracks which used to carry the munitions out to be cabled down to the water are there back in place. We were really not, there's a restoration architect that rebuilt these buildings that had trees running through them. Walking through the site, these are the berms that were made by the British to stop the munitions from exploding. So we actually passed between these channels, much like we did in India. In fact, the environment, this is our competition drawing. The museum had 8-foot thick walls, so we actually don't need to insulate this, which is kind of cool. So we tried to leave as much of that munitions depot intact as we could. Here we are walking now. In this case, we've cut a channel through the berm, so we're sort of taking one of these indirect journeys to stop bad spirits from following if you follow Chinese stuff. So here we are looking back at the one thing we did, which is this one simple building. And the final project I'm going to show is this in Prospect Park. So, I mean, this is an interesting problem because anyone who knows about the Obama Library knows that we're doing it in Olmsted and Vaux Park. Olmsted and Vaux were the architects of Central Park. Olmsted was the landscape architect, Vaux was the architect. And they made Central Park and then made Prospect Park. Now, today, Brooklyn's a hot place to be, but that park for many years ran fallow. And so this is our project that we did there. The two different parks. Central Park's the bigger park at 840 acres, built in 1857. That really, what's interesting is that, in a way, I've always thought when I came to Manhattan with the island sort of lined with piers, it felt like this was the only green in the entire city, at least so I felt. Today we realize this is Greenwood Cemetery, this is Prospect Park. Prospect Park was their favored park. It was smaller, done 10 years later, but they said they learned 3 lessons from Central Park. Number one, they could make a bigger natural lake. Central Park is a natural lake. A bigger woods, a deeper woods, and a longer meadow. I'm still partial to Central Park, but this was the design of that portion of the park, which was near Ebbets Field and where the Dodgers used to be, kind of the people end of the park. At that time, Olmsted and Vaux made a carriage turnaround here, had something called Music Island, where musicians were to go play to people who would sit in the concert grove, and people then would boat and skate on the lake. But that all fell fallow to Robert Moses. These are the images from the 1800s when you could go on the lake. That kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore, it's not allowed. So Robert Moses destroyed that and made a parking lot of 300 cars right exactly where the carriage turn-in run was, destroyed Music Island and Concert Grove and put a rink there. But it was quite popular. It was also cool if you wanted to go to New York, you'd park your car there for a week and then go into the city. But so this was our project, and what we did with this, we made the largest building there. We put our new skating center exactly where the parking lot was. We got rid of the cars, and now today there are no cars allowed in Prospect Park. We restored Music Island and the Concert Grove. So we've actually made the largest building in Prospect Park, but it's nearly hidden because the earth comes up over this building and up over this building. So we've now in New York got combined ice between hockey and roller skating and a water fountain. So in fact, I was just there yesterday, it was snowing. And this was covered in snow with a Zamboni out, cleaning it off, and people skating, because when there's snow and ice, it's not as good as the hockey rink, but the hockey rink was pristine. At any rate, the idea was to extend the season. So this is the site soon after it was built, and you can see its relationship to Manhattan. This is the site the year after it was done, and we've got a giant green roof on top of the rink, but our buildings are really invisible from the air. In fact, I fly over it fairly often, and from the ground you can see this is the restored edge of the Concert Grove, and then this is our building, which is a big cantilevered roof. Actually made rather inexpensively. The whole thing is pretty expensive, but to give a kind of secret of a place without making a building. So this cantilevered roof indicates this sort of sense of freedom on the ice or rollerblades. It's supported by actually these columns, which then cantilever a continuous beam out to catch open bar joists that go across it. And then we use stone from Canada that have been split face to emulate the kind of stone that you've got. The entire place is free except when you go on the ice. Everything else is free. So yesterday I could just simply walk right through this area and enjoy it, although it's snowy without being charged. We have 50% of all the toilets in Prospect Park are here, and they're all good toilets, safe, clean toilets. Billy designed this long mural that goes from winter to summer. Then I did the work on the ceiling, which is representative but not skating marks. It looks like there are lights there. We thought we'd put lights there, but we couldn't afford them, so it's just the reflection of these lights off onto those carved surfaces. In the summer, it's roller skating. I mean, kids falling down, seeming to kill themselves every few minutes. And then the water play where the outdoor rink is. And a couple final pictures, and then, yeah, it's been a very successful project, and actually I think is one of the reasons we're doing the Presidential Center, because we're going to try to bury virtually all of the buildings except for one tower. So here we now look out onto the pond, the lake that Olmsted and Vaux did. We've got more ice than they ever had, and it's full of life, and it works. And that's it, a deep breath. So I kind of raced through all that stuff. I only have to go to that airplane, leave at 7. So I really, really regret I'm not able to stay, have a meal, meet some of you actually. Will visit your buildings. They look great, so I'm sorry. I want to say, by the way, that Shigeru Ban was my student at Cooper. I taught there for 20 years. In the late 70s, we called him Sugar Bear. And he was the same kind of student he is as an architect. And I will say that, and that's the great wonder of this man. But at any rate, it's nice to be in his building and your building. I'm also happy to take any questions, because although Michelle says I've got to leave right away, I don't want to leave. Do you guys do questions or any of that stuff? Should we turn on the lights?
Can you tell us about the Obama Center?
Mm-hmm. Well, we won it in a competition. It was a brutal competition. First there were 140 people, and then there were 20, and then there were 7 of us. And we were asked to design for 2 sites in Chicago, because he wasn't sure which site he wanted to have. They were both in Olmsted and Vaux parks, right near the University of Chicago. We believed in one site, but he chose the other site. And because we believe in him, we believe in the site choice. It's closer to the lake. It's closer to the Museum of Science and Industry. It's closer to where Michelle grew up, and it's closer to where they have their home. She believed that it was very, very important to have the synergy of the Presidential Center connect with the MSI, which gets 1.3 million visitors a year. So our project was a combination, and is today a combination of buildings which are buried in the land, but which have apertures that bring light down to them. So in fact, it's one connected building below grade of 250,000 square feet, and then a tower, which we think is emblematic, or should be emblematic, of the south side of the noble presidency of the people. The top floor of that will be open and free. And actually all of the first 2 floors of the entire complex will be free. We have I'm fighting a 400-car parking garage, because I don't believe in parking garages, but that too will be buried. And then the president has in his mind an athletic center, because he says, and it's true, that kids learn to cooperate on the basketball court. And Michelle's interested in physical fitness, and they have they want this to be a kind of a summit for young people. So it'll be a multi-purpose facility. President always saying it's basketball, basketball, basketball. Other people saying no, no, no. He listens to everybody, which is kind of great. It's very likely there will actually be a public library branch there. There's no public library nearby. If that works out, which is one of our goals, that would be wonderful. So that the library is the material that the president has from his 8 years in office is all basically protected by the government and built by the president, but is in a deep, cold archive. And that is going to be sent further out in Illinois. But all of that is being digitized, so it's going to be available at the center. And the objects will be taken from that and put into the museum in the center and perhaps a portion of the library. His idea is that he wants it to be, because he's young, and this is really one of the reasons you haven't heard from him. He's been fundraising for this, and he really sees this as the more important part of his life. He obviously felt frustrated by the presidency, and he wants to empower young people to change the world. That's his basic objective. And they're pretty amazing people. So, he can read plans, by the way, and he's got his opinions. So it's interesting, very, very interesting. So is that enough? I hope that's all. But Willis mentioned that they wanted to get these images out, which I quite hate. I'd like to keep all the images to myself as long as possible. Because I think it's better to grow and evolve your project in time, and it doesn't need public scrutiny, but public is scrutinizing it, and we have to deal with that. So we are listening not only to the president, as he listens to everyone, we're trying to listen to our hearts, and we're listening to the public. So I'm happy to say that the local community seems very supportive of it. But people who are absolute diehard Olmsted and Vox plans people feel that there shouldn't be a tower in the park. So I'll have to live with that, but I believe in it, so we'll have to make it a good one. Yes?
Do you have any general tips for dealing with politically charged clients and commissions?
Well, it's really, this comes more from Billie than me. I would like to fight and duke it out. She will never fight and doesn't believe in it, and she says, let all of this die down. Listen, but don't listen too closely. And I think, again, we try to follow the people that we respect and the people we trust and trust our own hearts. I think it's very, very difficult. You try to, listen to but transcend public discussion. So what have we heard from the public? They want there to be more green, less activity in the park. That's an easy one. Removing the tower is going to be unlikely. Making the tower more elegant, the president would like that. We'd all like that. It's hard to make an elegant tower. There are all sorts of other things. We had proposed parking off the site and actually putting it under another landscape nearby so that when you left your car, you would have to walk in the streets. This is the south side, and we believe people should be in the streets. The president believed in that. The community didn't want that. So we've now brought it back onto the site. So again, I think that all of this stuff is a lot of, you have to listen, but you have to be careful not to listen too closely. It was really important for us in the Barns. We had to believe in what we were doing. Yeah.
On your team working on that project, or are you working on multiple projects?
Well, we have, in terms of something that's, I don't know whether you're an architect, and for the last 2 years, we didn't take on another project. We can't have the whole studio work on that. In fact, it's Billie and me and Paul, the three partners, with Billie, Paul, and me. It's a younger partner. Then we have a small team, and we're growing the team as we get deeper into it. We have an associate architect in Chicago, but it's very, very important, in my opinion, that we take responsibility for the work right here, that the buck stops here. So we try to keep the team as small as possible. One of the good things about the studio is that they're extremely capable of doing great work. So we have 4 projects under construction. That's good, and the reason I'm going back tomorrow is that if we don't get another project on within the next year, we'll have to let people go. So it also is a good project, not only a good project, maybe a great project, but it can't interfere with that. You've got to really, we need to know what your priority is, and our priority is said to the presidential center. Whatever they say we will do. I mean, whenever they need us, because that's quite difficult. I mean, yes, hey Sally.
I was just wondering how it felt to watch one of your great buildings be destroyed.
Oh, well, I mean, that's also interesting. The Folk Art Museum that Willis talked about really was a labor of absolute love, much smaller studio. I gave too much of myself to it. So it was very, very traumatic, I should say. We couldn't do anything about it. Billy often reminds me, hey, you know, it's not a person, it's a building, and we've all had real tragedies in our lives, and it's important to keep work in perspective and use that as a springboard to do better work. So you always have to take whatever bad stuff comes and realize that you've got to somehow transcend it, but it did hurt. And I will say that there's some of it in the tower, there's some of the Folk Art Museum, if I can have it, but maybe I shouldn't have it, I don't know. Anyway, I'm thinking about that. We haven't, it's all very tender stuff. Okay. Anything else?
What other projects are in the studio right now?
Well, we're doing an addition to a museum at Dartmouth. Charles Moore designed the museum. It's the Hood. Charles was Billy's thesis advisor. We're getting some eggs thrown at us for destroying part of Charles's building, but we're also saving a great deal of it at great cost. That'll be open in a year. We're doing a project at Exeter where Lou Kahn did the great library. We're doing a creative and performing arts center. That too will open. It's a much more, but it's a very tough little box. It's interesting, we're working with the Jewish Theological Seminary. Chuckle, I'm sorry. But Richard got to do the Church of the Year 2000. Richard Meyer did, the Catholic Church, so it's okay, I can do it. We had Judaism 101, I've got it. At any rate, it's really a great and interesting project because they're amazing people and they have an idea of community that's very, very important. It's a conservative Jewish group and they have noble aspirations and less money than we'd like. It's in just up above Columbia in New York. And then we are doing, I didn't mention we're doing 2 houses. We're doing some affordable housing, which is a very, very small amount, and which is more important to me than the houses. I think we'll be backing out of private houses. We always have done a couple of them. So that's it.
Wait, I have one more.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
When you're doing the affordable housing, you're doing the presidential center, what role does energy play into it?
Oh, huge in all cases. Well, the affordable housing is done inside an existing warehouse that's not been used for 60 years. So I have to insulate that thing like hell. It's going to be important. But at least I don't have to put a footprint on. The president has told us, we have signed an agreement for the minimum of LEED Platinum 4, which is a high bar, but he also wants to do a net zero building. And so it's a very, very serious subject for us, and one that gives us all sorts of challenges. You can't do a perfect net zero building in Chicago there, because if we did, we'd cover the park entirely with solar panels. But we might be able to give them to either buildings nearby in exchange. Ideally, you'd generate that power near your building. I mean, I've had a number of, I thought, brilliant ideas, and everybody's nixed them, but so they're not so brilliant. They're actually not brilliant. But they may have to ultimately invest in that in order to get that. But the buildings will have be very careful energy buildings. Unfortunately, some of the things are quite challenging. The museum portion, which is, I don't know, about 60,000 square feet, which will have to have museum level comfort, is going to be very challenging because we need redundant systems. And then because it actually has a lot of security issues, the buildings are going to be made quite massive. So I can't tell you every day there's something about that project that's tough. It costs a lot, but certainly burying the buildings and we'll use geothermal. We're going to burying a lot of the buildings has been a very good strategy. Massive walls helps us tremendously. Putting windows where they need to be rather than just, you know, letting them set out indiscriminately is critical. So like the barns, they'll have focused windows. Yeah.
Well,
Ty?
wish you luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.